Record in the cloud. Okay, we're recording now. In addition to maintaining things like ask.extension.org, learn.extension.org, also do internal support for our e-extension staff. So we use Zoom. We use Zoom a whole bunch, being a virtual organization, and also do some external support. Usually, if folks outside of e-extension have issues with Zoom or questions, I'm usually available to help too. So I've been with e-extension since about 2014. So in fact, I think this month, October, is my 5-year anniversary. I've done over 100, hosted and configured over 100 webinars for Zoom, and did hundreds of meetings too. So I'm intimately familiar with Zoom. You know, we did e-extension had sort of a formal webinar benefit for about 1.5 years. In fact, many of you I see on here, we conducted webinars for you all. So that's where I really got a lot of experience, especially on the Zoom webinar side. I was sort of doing those, not quite a full-time job, but close to being a full-time job. And I was doing maybe anywhere from 2 to 4 webinars a week for about 1.5 years there. So I got lots of experience with just all the different ins and outs of Zoom, and specifically Zoom webinars. So real quick, this is the agenda. I won't go through this slide, but I'll just give you a second to look through sort of the agenda and what we'll be talking about for the next hour. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is, and anytime someone contacts me, so Zoom has a lot of uses, right? When you think about it, it can be ad hoc meetings where just you and a colleague need to chat. It can be for conference type meetings where you have 5, 10, 50, even 100 people on. And then of course there's the webinar piece to Zoom. So they're all, they all sort of fall under the umbrella of web conferencing or video conferencing, but they sort of have very different uses for each one of those things. So when I first start talking about Zoom, one of the first things I like to talk about or bring to people's attention is the difference between a meeting and a webinar. And these are very specific technical differences within Zoom. And you sort of need to get the nomenclature right when you're talking about that, because Zoom, from Zoom's perspective, for instance, we call these webinars that we're doing now, it's a learning circle, but even within our group, somebody say, well, let's do a webinar on this topic. And I'll be like, okay, the first thing I'll say, okay, we're talking about a webinar, we're talking about a meeting here, because again, in the context of Zoom, they mean very different things. So generally when we're talking about a meeting, it is what we're on now. This is technically a meeting inside Zoom. So in this meeting, everyone has live audio and video. Now your video may be turned off, your mics are probably muted, but you've got the ability to use live audio and video. So that's a meeting inside Zoom. When we talk about a webinar, the difference in a meeting and a webinar is a webinar has speakers, or again, the technical term is Zoom calls those panelists. So panelists in a webinar have live audio and video, and attendees, or the participants, but again, just so our language is right, the term Zoom uses is attendees. Attendees are view only. So that means they don't have live audio and video. They only have the ability to see and hear panelists on a webinar. Now they can communicate in the webinar via Q&A and chat. And actually we do have the host of the webinar has the ability to promote an attendee to a panelist so they can have live audio and video, but generally those attendees are view only, and they don't have live audio and video. And so yeah, again, panelists, live audio and video, attendees are view only. Okay, so when should you use a meeting? When should you use a webinar? I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of each one of these. So pros for a meeting are it's cheap. Now when I say it's cheap, I mean that it costs less than what a webinar does. We'll talk in a minute about webinars in Zoom and purchasing a webinar license. But again, to do a webinar, you have to purchase an additional webinar license. Using a meeting in Zoom, you can just use that sort of out of the box. All you need is a Zoom user to create a meeting. So generally, we like to say there's more interaction on a meeting than there is on a webinar. And I only say that because again, you have live audio and video on a meeting. Now there's lots of ways to get interaction on a webinar. Again, I mentioned Q&A and chat. There's also things like polls that you can do, but generally it's fair to say there's more interaction with a meeting than there is a webinar. So cons, more difficult to manage. So generally, and again, it depends on the number of people on a meeting, but when you start to get into the 20 plus range, I would say with a meeting, you have to watch out for things like open microphones. If someone's doing something distracting in a camera, then that can be something that you sort of need to manage and watch. So generally a meeting is more difficult to manage. Now we'll also talk about from a technical standpoint, webinars can be more difficult to create and configure, but just from the standpoint of being on a live broadcast, again, once you get above that 20 or 30 participant number, meetings are generally a bit more difficult to manage. And then meetings are limited to 100 participants. Now I'll talk about a large meeting room license later, so you do have the ability to have more than 100 participants on a meeting, but again, out of the box with just a standard Zoom user, Zoom meetings are limited to 100 participants. Okay, so what about a webinar? So pros with a Zoom webinar. So again, better for large numbers. So generally it's just more manageable once you get into above that 20 or 30 number of participants on a call. Those folks who aren't speakers or aren't panelists are going to be view only. So again, you don't really have to manage. There's nothing you have to manage or worry about there. You're only you really only have to worry about the speakers and those who have a formal role in the webinar. It's generally more structured too, I like to say, and what I mean by that is, again, you've got specific panelists who are going to be speaking, and they've got a speaking role. You also have a lot more flexibility. We'll talk about things like registration and other features in Zoom that just make the whole environment, the whole process much more structured, as opposed to if you've got 100 people that are on a Zoom meeting, it can feel chaotic at times depending on the number of people who need to speak, order of speakers, and things like that. So Zoom webinar really allows you to sort of add some structure to the chaos of having a large meeting or speaking engagement. And then cons with Zoom webinars. So cost, we talked about that. A Zoom webinar license starts at $40. I think that's for 100 participants, and it just goes up from there. I've got a slide coming up that's going to show you the cost structure, but just know that there is a cost that's associated with, and this is an additional cost to having a regular Zoom user that's associated with a Zoom webinar. So generally, like to say there's less interaction on a webinar than what there is on a meeting, again, because attendees are view only, that they don't have live audio and video. Now, again, there's ways to manage that with Q&A and chat. And generally, the webinars I've done in the past, even with very large numbers, we feel like we have good, we'd say we have good interaction, but again, it's not quite like having everyone have live audio and video. And then technical know-how, I've got that listed as a con too, just because it does, it's not rocket science, but setting up a Zoom webinar, there's enough bells and whistles there that you really need to be familiar with it. And the other thing is, if you're not doing it on a regular basis, it can be difficult. I've had people that approach me and say, well, we're thinking about buying our own license, but we're only going to do a webinar once a month, let's say. Even that's maybe not frequent enough that that you sort of know where all the bells and whistles and buttons are that you sort of need to click to manage them. So again, there is a certain level of technical know-how that you need to have to host a Zoom webinar. Okay, so let's talk about large meeting room. So the large meeting room license is basically the same functionality as a regular meeting. It only increases the number of participants in a room. And again, I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that in a subsequent slide that shows the price structure. But I think currently you can buy a 500 and 1,000 seat large meeting room. So again, same thing as a regular meeting room. It just allows you to have more than 100 participants in a room. Okay, so here's this cost slide. this is a lot of text to have on a slide. I usually don't like to sort of shove this much, but it was just sort of the best way to give you a range. So if you want to, if you're really curious about costs, you may want to get a snapshot of this slide. And I'm not going to go through all these, but I'll just sort of go from the top down and hit the high points. So, be aware too that there's a free Zoom user account that you can create. In fact, I've got a personal Zoom account that I use for personal stuff that's free. The limitations with that account are, if it's just you and one other person, you basically just use it just like a pro account. You've got unlimited meeting time. If there's more than 2 people on a call, though, it's limited to 40 minutes. So for instance, I'm on the trustees at my church. So from time to time we'll do a virtual meeting, and that group will meet, and there's 5 of us. I use my free account for that. And again, you'll get a nag message at 30 minutes that says, you've only got 10 minutes left. And I actually kind of like that 40-minute time limit. It's just enough time to get some real work done, but it sort of forces you to be efficient in the way you work. But that's the only limitation, or there is that limitation to a free account. A pro account with Zoom is, I think, $14 a month is where it starts out at. E-extension, I think we have about 30. We generally pay for about 30 Zoom accounts. I think we pay a little less for that because we're buying more, but generally that pro account's around $14 a month. And again, what that gives you is unlimited time limits on meetings. And again, you can have 100 participants in those meetings with no time limits. Webinar license, you can see the structure there. So again, it starts out at $40 for 100, goes all the way up to almost $6,500 a month for 10,000 for 10,000 attendees. E-extension has a 500 seat license, is what we've had for the last few years. We have bumped that up to 1,000 before. We've got one client that we work with that they frequently have. They have up to 1,000 attendees on their webinars. So we'll bump that up from time to time. But that's sort of the cost structure for a webinar. And then large meeting room, you see those 500 and 1,000, 50 and $90 respectively. This price structure changes from time to time, because I'm almost sure the webinar license didn't have the increments that it has now in the past. So this is just sort of a snapshot in time on where Zoom is at now with their cost structure. Okay, let's talk about licensing. I want to put a question in here, or I wanted to put a slide in here about this just so I can sort of, this is one of those things that's, again, it's not rocket science unless you've used it and done it. It can be difficult to wrap your brain around. So this is true for the large meeting room license and for the webinar license. So a single license can be passed to other users, but only one user can use a license at a given time. So first off, this is all predicated on you've got an organizational account in Zoom. If you're just a single user, this is not going to apply, because obviously there's just one user. But generally, if you purchase Zoom license and you have an organizational setup, you have users that sort of live inside of an organization. So the way E-extension uses this is, again, with the webinar license. Generally, since I manage that license is assigned to me. But for instance, Aaron, if Aaron wanted to configure, set up and create a webinar, I could just assign that license to his user, and he could go in and create his own webinar. And the same thing with the large meeting room license. Whoever has that license at any given time, they're able to have meetings that go up to whatever level that license specifies. So if you've got a large meeting room license that allows 1,000 attendees, I could have it one day, and that would mean my meeting could host up to 1,000 people. I could assign it to Aaron that next day, and any meetings that he has created, then that large meeting room license is going to apply to his user in any meetings that he's host of. So just know that the license structure sort of works that way, and it's an efficient way to use it too. Again, if you wanted someone who, if you have 2 people who once or twice a month need to host meetings with 1,000 people, you don't need to buy 2 different licenses. You can buy a single license and just pass it around between those 2 people. So wanted to add a note about that. And again, that applies to both webinar and large meeting rooms. So I wanted to add a note about alternative hosts too. So Zoom has this concept of alternative hosts. This applies to both webinars and meetings. And basically this allows you to give other users admin, what I'm calling admin rights to a webinar or a meeting room. So I'll give you a scenario on one way it might be used. Let's say Aaron creates a meeting for a group meeting that we're having later in the week, and he does the invites. Everybody knows, has the Zoom room and the time, and let's say he can't show up to that meeting. Rather than cancel the meeting and have me create a new meeting, send out a new calendar invite with an updated link, he could just make me an alternative host for that meeting. That gives me the ability to actually start the meeting and act as host on the meeting. And just so we're clear about that term host, the host of a meeting is the one who sort of quote unquote owns the meeting. They have the ability to mute people, turn their video on and off, as well as kick folks out of the meeting. So that's why it's sort of important to be host. I've been on meetings before where you're not host, and if someone has an open mic or something like that, you don't have the ability to mute them. So just know that you've got this tool called you've got this feature called an alternative host. The way this applies for webinars is actually a nice way to squeeze sort of more value out of the webinar feature inside Zoom. So let's say the webinar, I'll give you another use case as an example of this. Let's say the webinar license is assigned to me. I go in and create and configure the webinar. I could assign Aaron as an alternative host. That would give Aaron the ability to start the webinar and then act as host on that webinar. So again, that's from a sort of from a divvying up task standpoint. If my responsibility is more on the technical side, and that's sort of the way we do it here, I'll go in and configure webinars, I'll set up polls, I'll add panelists, do all those technical things, and then I can assign another user as alternative host. If Aaron's the one that's going to be actually starting it, maybe he's doing the introductions, and he's sort of doing the technical tasks actually on the webinar. I can assign him alternative host, so that gives him the ability to start and then run the webinar. So again, it's a nice way. We've done this before where we've had multiple webinars going on at the same time, and like the first thing you think is, well, I must need multiple webinar licenses to be able to do these. Well, you don't need to do that. You can actually, one person who's assigned a license can actually create and configure the webinars and then set various users as alternative hosts. Now, the one caveat here is these other users you assign as alternative hosts need to be in your organization. So I just can't find some random user, Zoom user, and assign them alternative hosts. It has to be someone inside your organization, and it also has to be a pro account too. It can't be a free account. And then I've just got a screenshot at the bottom here. You can see of where you would assign an alternative host. That's sort of what that looks like.
Hey, Mark, there's a question from Julie England from the University of Florida. She says that she had a problem when she named an alternative host. She had problems signing on, and when she was already signed on. Was that normal or just a coincidence?
Let's see, Julie, if you're on and you've got live audio, why don't you chime in? So let me just read this again, because I had a problem when I named an alternative host. She had a problem. So I'm assuming you're talking about the alternative host had a problem signing in?
Correct. So we had a webinar, and I wanted to make sure somebody could get on in case I was sick or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I had signed her, and I'm pretty sure she has a pro account because it accepted her as a host.
Mm-hmm.
But and this was on more than one occasion that she had trouble signing on, like as in she couldn't sign on. And then when I just took her off as an alternative host and put her on as a panelist instead, she had no problem signing on.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the other thing is when you added her as an alternative host, and this is true for webinars and meetings, that person should get an email saying, hey, you've been added as an alternative host. And it also gives you a link, I think, in that email to click, to start. So if she clicked on that link, I mean, my only other thing is I wonder if she either didn't click that link or just tried to.
She did, but I'll have to double check with her. But
I don't know. I mean, the other thing I've ran into too is if people have multiple Zoom accounts, we have to be really careful about who you're logged in as. I've had people who have had Zoom accounts with either their home organization, but they also had one with us at E Extension, and when they logged in, it's not readily apparent who you're logging in as if you're not careful. So
that wasn't a problem, and that she only has one, which is our UF one. So
and when she clicked the link from the email, what error do you remember? What error message she was getting? Or
no, because she kept trying to sign on. Finally, she signed on as her significant other, and she got on as it was just screwy, but it happened on more than once. So now I just don't assign an alternative host.
Well, I would test
as a panelist.
Yeah, no, I would say you should. I mean, that should work. I've done it. In fact, I do it on a regular basis. We've got sort of an external client to E-Extension now. Now they've got an E-Extension Zoom user, and I do that every month. In fact, they do a monthly webinar, and I sign her as an alternative host, and she runs the webinar each month. So the other thing I'd say is just practice it. Create a fake test webinar, assign that users a multiple as an alternative host, and then have them log in and see. And if they can't, then and if you have issues, then submit a support ticket to Zoom so you can find out what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's see. Did I say anything? Yeah, I think I covered all alternative hosts. And yeah, please, folks, if you have questions, if you sort of ping Aaron, it's tough for me to do the presentation and sort of watch chat. So yeah, if you want to put a question in chat, and then Aaron, if you'll watch that, feel free to jump in with questions. Registration. So registration's available to both webinars and meetings. A lot of people, I think, maybe don't know about it in meetings as an option. So basically, obviously, it's a list of people who are going to attend a given meeting. So when would you want to use registration? So it's good for reminder emails. I like to use it that way. So again, an example. So if this is a weekly team meeting, you probably wouldn't want to do registration for that, right? I mean, you sort of know, everybody knows when you're going to meet, and so that's not. But for instance, something like the call we're on now, this is a meeting. Now, we used a Google form for the registration in this case, but we could have turned on Zoom registration for this meeting and use that. So a couple of nice things about that. So what happens in that case is, rather than sharing the meeting link, and I'll show you on a subsequent screen here what it looks like. There's just a small checkbox that you check inside a Zoom meeting settings to turn registration on. It gives you a registration link, and then you share that link with people who would potentially be joining the meeting you're on, and that forces them to, again, they don't have the link to join the live meeting. They have to fill out the registration form first, which in meetings just includes first name, last name, and email. And then the email they put in that registration form, they get a registration email that includes the actual link to join the meeting. So that's nice for a couple of reasons. Reminder emails are a good use of that. You share the registration link with people. They register prior. So let's say a day prior to the meeting you've got scheduled, you can go and pull a registration report that includes all the emails of the people that's registered. And then you can send a reminder email to those folks. Or let's say maybe there's some materials you want to share, PDFs, Google Drive, things like that, that you want to share with people. Then you've got a list of people that have registered for a given meeting or webinar. Lots of options inside Zoom webinar registration. For meetings, you don't have any options for custom questions. It's just first name, last name, and email address. But for The webinar registration, you can do custom questions there. And I think, yeah, I've got an image here. So this is what the meeting registration looks like. And if you see over here, it's kind of small, so you may not be able to see it real well. But again, all there is a registration checkbox. When you check that, it'll give you a registration link for that meeting. And then that's what you would share with people that you might want to attend in the meeting. And then on the right side, you see here, that's the registration screen where they're going to have to enter first name, last name, and then confirm their email address. So the webinar registration looks like what you see here. And in fact, I took these screenshots from one of our clients who has, she has a fairly sophisticated registration screen. You can see on the left side, that's on the admin side. When I configure the webinar, this is what I see. So we've got a bunch of quote custom questions that are in there. So, you know, everything from, so we're getting the obvious stuff, first name, last name, and email, but we're also getting city, state. They regularly have international folks on these webinars. So we've got country listed there too. What's your professional interest in this webinar? So there's a bunch of questions, and it's really a nice way to get. I mean, then the way we use this, the way we've used this in the past is I'll go and maybe a day or two prior to the webinar, I can go pull this registration report and then share this with the speakers, and it'll give them a sense of maybe who's going to be on the webinar. Now, it's not going to totally change their content, but it may inform some. It may inform a particular topic they're going to cover. Maybe they spend more time on one topic versus another based on the professional interest or the background of the people that they know are going to be on the webinar. Now, one of the things I do caution people is if you get too sophisticated with these registration forms, it can turn folks off, right? So a lot of it depends on how bad they want to show up to your webinar. So if you've got 20 questions they have to answer, then that may turn some folks off, and they just don't want to bother having to fill those questions out to get the registration link. So just be aware of that. Okay, polls. So polls are available to both webinars and meetings. Great way to get interaction with the audience. Great feedback tool, not just like during a current live webinar for live feedback, but also we'll talk about this, and I got a reporting slide later. You can go back and pull that information as a part of the report for a meeting or webinar after the fact. So it's a great way to get feedback about a meeting or a webinar. And so with that said, let's give it a try. I've got two polls we're going to do. One is a single choice, and another is multiple choice, just so you can see the options there. So I've launched that poll. You should see it now. So the question is, how often do you use Zoom? Never, daily, weekly, or monthly. So again, if you've never done a poll in Zoom before, if you never administered a poll, so you see what you see on your end, obviously now, which is the poll question. On my end, just so you know, I see little bar graphs, and actually, now that I'm saying that, it would be nice to have shared a screenshot, but I actually see a little bar graph on my end where I can see is when people respond. And so, so it looks like, yeah, it looks like we've got about half and half weekly and monthly. So I'm going to share the results so you can see those. So you should see those results on the screen. So the other thing that's fun here, I think you would agree, it's sort of nice not only to take a poll, but when you see the results, it's just sort of fun to see what other folks say too, and to sort of see how your response maybe compares to other people. So the interactive piece is nice here, not just for you as someone holding a meeting or a webinar to be able to get feedback, but it's kind of fun and makes things interesting for the attendees too. All right, so I've got another one here, and this is just an example of a multi-choice poll. Let me advance my slide. So let me launch that. So this is an example of a multi-choice poll. And you'll notice here, so which of the following Zoom features have you used in the past? And you notice there's a checkbox now rather than a radio button, and you can choose multiple options. So I give you a chance to choose those. I mean, the other thing you do is I'll, as the host sort of running and launching the poll, again, I can see the results as they come in. I can see the percentage, and usually, and this is what it is now. I'm at about 80% now, and I usually tell people that that's the number I look for to end of the poll, because for whatever reason that 20% just either doesn't want to participate, or maybe can't. You never know if there's some technical reason on their end. So yeah, I'm at 80% now, which is usually where it ends up at. So I'll end the poll and I'll share the results. So we've got a fairly sophisticated group here. Most, more than half of you have done webinars as speakers and as attendees, registration, screen share, alternative hosts. So yeah. Okay, and so this is what, again, not a real great screenshot here, but this is what polls look like on the meeting side at the bottom of them. Again, a lot of these links are hidden. I mean, if you've really dug around in Zoom, Zoom is great. It's very robust. There's a ton of features, but the downside is there's a ton of features. So there's a lot of configuration that's inside a given meeting or a webinar. But at the bottom, if you scroll down to the bottom of a meeting that you've created, you've got this link that says where you can add polls, and then that little bottom image is what when you create a poll, that's the configuration screen, what it looks like. All right, let's talk about reporting. So reporting, I'll say from the get-go, is very robust in Zoom. A lot of people haven't dug around, and again, you don't really see it as much unless you're a heavy Zoom user. But for organizational admins, for people who, and again, the e-extension, we're not huge. We're only anywhere from 10 to 15 sort of full-time people, and then we've got fellows and other folks, but we don't have huge numbers in Zoom. But again, we're virtual, entirely virtual, so we do a lot of meetings, and we don't do as many webinars as we've done in the past, but I can go to the reporting console in e-extension Zoom account, and there's a ton of data and meeting data, attendee data, all of those things are sort of encapsulated inside the reporting in Zoom. So registration, we've already talked about. And again, all of this stuff is available sort of in perpetuity in Zoom. There's no, it doesn't get removed or deleted after any time frame. So it is, I mean, it's nice to be able to go back. Hey, I know we had a meeting or a webinar a year ago. Let me go back and dig and see if I can pull up the registration numbers for that. We generally just from an organizational standpoint, or from an organization standpoint, we'll download a lot of that data and store it in Google Drive, because I'm sure at some point Zoom is going to limit how far back or you can go to before they start to archive the data. But again, most of that still lives there in the past. They've got a search feature you can use to pull up those things. So registration, we talked about. Attendance, so registration data is different than attendee data. People may register. I mean, generally the attendance numbers are lower than what the registration numbers for any given meeting or webinar are. So those are two different things. And again, the reporting can be helpful there, right? If you have a webinar or a meeting that you hold, you can look at the registration data and maybe compare that to the attendee data, find the folks who didn't show up and maybe send them a link to the recording. So there's all kinds of interesting ways you can use the data that you get there. Polls we talked about. Again, the polls we just did, that's saved inside our Zoom account now, so I can log in after the fact. I can download a CSV. All of these reports are in CSV full format, so it's all historical, so you can always log back in and go back and look at it after the fact. Chat, the transcripts are chat and Q&A on the webinar side are available as reporting data, and again, that the Q&A is webinar only. And then again, I mentioned they're all in CSV format, so they're fair. I mean, I shouldn't say they're user friendly necessarily, because some of these, and I'll show you on this next screen, I mean, some of them can be, the CSV files can be fairly sophisticated depending on the number of questions you have and the type of data you're looking at. But CSV is as good a format as any to be able to view, because certainly if you want to be able to sort and do other things with the data, then CSV is a good way to handle it. So this is just one view of the reporting screen. This particular one is the webinar reporting screen. So you can see you've got date ranges there you can filter by, and if you notice those radio buttons on the report type, you can get a registration report, attendee report, performance report, Q&A, poll. So you can pull all these things out, and again, the meeting reporting page looks very similar to this. And then this is an example of what CSV file might look like for a webinar or a meeting. And this particular, I think this is a registration report, but again, the attendee report looks very similar to this. And again, these are very robust. If you go in and dig into the data for each of these users, you can look at what time they joined the webinar, what time they left, how many minutes that they were on. There's an attention number. The term is escaping me right now, but basically it's the idea is your Zoom sort of has a technology in place to tell how much attention people are paying to the webinar. And I think basically the way it is if the Zoom window is in focus, then you're getting points. If it's out of focus, so if somebody clicks off that window, and let's say they're clicking inside a web browser or some other software program, then that score goes down. I think it's an attentiveness score is what they call it. But again, it's just an interesting way. If you really want feedback on how well your meetings or webinars are doing, you can look at that attentiveness score and get a sense of how engaged folks are by whether they've got the window in focus or not. Okay, recording. So all of your Zoom meetings or webinars are going to have this little record button down at the bottom. Now, in fact, as Aaron saw, you heard it when we were recording this. It's there for everybody. In fact, you all probably see it too. But if you clicked on it now and tried to record, I think you'll probably get a message that says the host hasn't given you rights to record, or something like that. So generally, only the host can record a webinar. The host has the option to make other people on a call either co-host, or they can make someone else host. And I've actually done that before, where I've been on a meeting. I had to leave for whatever reason, but I wanted someone else to have the ability to be able to mute people and sort of run the meeting. I made someone else host and then left the webinar. So or the webinar or meeting, you can do that with both of those. So. But recording, so you can record either locally or inside the cloud. So cloud recording is only available to pro accounts. Free Zoom accounts don't have that option. For pro accounts, you've got up to one gig. I think it's per user, because I think we have our default at eXtension is 30 or 40 gigabytes, and you can purchase additional cloud storage if you want. Just to give you a sense of the recordings in Zoom and their size, an hour-long presentation in my experience is around 600 megabytes. So with a gig, you've only got you're using up more than half your storage, let's say in an hour meeting. So you don't have a ton of space. I generally record mine locally unless I know I'm going to be sharing it with someone else. I'll generally record them locally because again, in fact, as the administrator of Zoom, I'm always watching our cloud storage, the amount of space we've got, and every few months I have to send a reminder to folks and tell them to go in and prune old recordings. But yeah, and then just a note about the local recording locally too. People often don't know where that's at. It's sort of buried deep. I think for Windows users, it's in user / or your username / documents, and then there's a Zoom folder inside there. People often do a recording and it records, but then they don't know where it's saved at. So just be aware of your sort of file folder structure and where things get saved at. Rebecca says, any pros or cons for recording to the cloud or locally as far as uploading to YouTube? No. So they're both MP4 files. And even when it's recorded to the cloud, you're going to download it anyway. And that's sort of what I tell people too. I've had people say, well, I'm going to record to the cloud. And then I'm like, that's going to be another download and upload step for you. At least as far as I know, there's not someone to chime in if there is. I don't think there's a way to upload directly from Zoom Cloud to a YouTube account, although I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they would have that. But no real advantage to to cloud and recording locally versus in the cloud. Again, I'll do it locally just because rather than having to download and then upload it again if I'm going to a third-party hosting site. I mean, the one advantage I would say, not with regard to YouTube, but it is neat that you've got a bunch of sharing options in Zoom. inside the cloud. So when you do a video recording to the cloud, you've got a share option there where you can make it basically viewable to anyone, and you can just share a link that way, and other folks can view it inside Zoom.
Hey, Mark, you do have a number of questions that have come in over the last few minutes. So I'll start with the newest and kind of go backwards a little bit. Mm-hmm. So can you say again where the recording file is saved?
So for local, if you're saving it locally, it's going to be on your local hard drive, and it's in the documents folder. I think there's a Zoom. I don't know right offhand, because again, it can change from time to time. But there's a Zoom. I think there's a Zoom folder inside your documents folder on your local hard drive, and then that's where, in fact, each meeting is going to have. Once you drill down into that folder, each meeting or webinar is going to have a separate folder, and then inside that's where the recording is going to live.
Okay. Now
one note there real quick too is if you'll let it process after you do a recording, if you're recording it locally, there's a little window that pops up. Now it often can easily get hidden behind another window, but if that runs, then once it's finished processing, there's a window that pops up that'll ask you if you want to go to that folder location. So if it works the way it's supposed to, and you sort of see that window and click that button, then it'll take you right to the location. But often what happens is people either miss that window, or it gets buried in the background. They don't see it, and then so they're sort of lost. Okay, I don't know where my recording is. So just one note of caution there.
So are there any pros or cons for recording to the cloud or locally as far as uploading to YouTube?
Right. So that's what I was addressing as far as no. And in fact, I mean, so they're both MP4 files. If you save it locally, it's going to be saved as an MP4 file. If it's saved to Zoom Cloud, then you're going to have to download. If you want to upload it to YouTube or Vimeo or some other cloud hosting provider, you're going to have to download it locally and then upload it to that provider. When you download it from Zoom, it's going to be an MP4 format. So the format's the same. Now I will say the recording itself actually looks different, and it's not coming to me right now. If someone knows that, they can chime in. But like with regard to these little Brady Bunch boxes is what I call them, but the video boxes that are there, I think maybe they don't exist in the cloud recording, but when you do record locally, they are there. So there are some slight differences in just the format of the video itself when you record to the cloud versus when you record locally. And listen, what I would say for all this too is people often ask this and they say, well, I was afraid it wouldn't work right, so I didn't do it. Try it. You should, experiment with it without, just create a fake. It's not going to cost you anything or hurt anything with your Zoom account. Create a fake meeting or create a fake webinar. Maybe have a colleague join you as a panelist. If it's a webinar, do a recording, and just do a 5-minute recording, maybe record to the cloud as a test, record locally as a test, and sort of just see what the result is. I mean, you can read the documentation and ask questions all day, but until you actually go in and do it, that's sort of the real way to understand it. So I would encourage people to go in and test.
And Dawn had a question. Are there any analytics that show after the fact viewers, those that weren't on live but watched it later?
No, there's not. So, and I mean, maybe that question's somewhat flawed, and I'll just let me talk through it and let's see. So, to the question of whether they've watched it later, the question is where are they watching it later at? So Zoom has no way of knowing what's going on YouTube for instance. So if you let's say you hold a live meeting like we've got now, we'll have our attendee report that we can run, so we know how many people watched it there. At that point, if we upload it to YouTube, now YouTube has its own set of analytics that you can look at and see how many viewers you've got. So Dawn, I hope that answers your question as far as I think what you're getting at is, hey, if I want to see the total number of people that have viewed this live in addition to viewing the recording, then whatever hosting provider you use, you'll want to look at that. As far as Zoom hosting goes, again, I did mention you can share a link in Zoom of a recording. I don't think there's any analytics there. I could be wrong, but I don't think Zoom has any analytics for a hosted video that people would watch. But again, my recommendation would be if you're truly sharing it to the general public, you're going to probably want it on a provider like YouTube or Vimeo or some other third party like that. And all of those platforms do have analytics that you can look at and see how many people have viewed it.
Just a couple more. Lost my place. I'm so sorry. So back to the poll results real quick. Are poll results saved with your meeting if you record it? Just wondering if you can come back to them later.
They are. Well, and so it's not a matter of whether it's recorded or not. I mean, the recording is a separate piece. That if you're recording the video, that's just part of the video. The poll itself, though, is part of the reporting piece. So I think I had a picture of the reports. In fact, let me go back to, this will look a little different. Yeah, so this is report screen. Now this is for a webinar in this case, but you can do it for meetings too. But you can see you can pull the poll report of previous webinars. You can do the same things for meetings too. And again, that's saved as part of the reporting. And that's separate from whether you record it or not. It doesn't matter if you actually record the video or not.
And on that same line, Rebecca is wondering if the recording shows the chat and Q&A.
It does not.
Okay.
Yeah, right. And that people, you have to be careful about, the windows, there are all kind of various windows in Zoom. Like right now, I've got the chat up and I'm looking at that. It's a separate window. The recording is just of sort of the video on that main window, and there's no, and I think you can even maybe embed the chat sort of in the same web browser window, but that doesn't show up in the recording. The recording only includes the video. Same with polls too. Like when you launch a poll the way I did, that poll, that question the question that you saw, the results, that stuff is not actually on the video recording.
And just one more, are the polls only available with a webinar license?
No, they're not. So they're part of the meeting too. And I think that's free. I don't think there's any restrictions there, whether it's free versus pro account. Okay, good questions. Let's see, recording. So I talked about local versus cloud. Auto record, I just sort of mentioned this as a feature many people use. A lot of folks at E-Extension do it. Now this can bloat your cloud recording. Well, and it depends on if you're doing cloud or local. But anyway, there's a setting in Zoom, and listen, this is just one of many. There's dozens of features in Zoom that I don't even know about just because I've never used, but I just thought this was one I would mention while I was talking about recording. There's an auto recording feature you can use. A lot of people at E-Extension use this, and they record every meeting. So by default, any meeting that they host, because, and I think probably what this came from is many of us have been, well, and we did it, you saw it here, that it's easy to forget to start recording a given meeting or a webinar. So there's a feature, it's a checkbox inside Zoom. I think you do it at the user level, so each user can choose that, hey, I want to auto record every meeting that I start. It's going to record that meeting. Just a note there on recording, it's sort of good etiquette, and it's courteous to let folks know when something's being recorded. And so I always, just me as a rule, I always like to make sure everyone knows, and I try to do it whether it's a webinar or a meeting. Before I start recording, I just let everyone know on the meeting that you're going to be recording that meeting. Now there's a little icon in Zoom, if you know where to look for it, you know, and everyone can see that it's being recorded. But again, from just a virtual etiquette courtesy standpoint, it's nice to let folks know when something's being recorded. People may speak or share their thoughts, and in addition to their image could show up on a recording. So again, it's just it's good etiquette to make sure people know when something's going to be recorded. And then using a screencast, I have too. And a lot of people, looks like a lot of people chose that as one of the features that they use often inside Zoom. So I won't spend a ton of time on it, but it's a great way to use. Zoom's a great tool to use for screencasting. Again, you can use this with the free account. Just real quick, the way I'll use it a lot is somebody will ask about a software feature or maybe something on a website or something like that. I can spend 15 minutes typing up an email and saying, okay, I'm clicking here and I'm doing this. Or what I'll do is I'll just start a meeting up in Zoom. I'm the only attendee, the only participant in that meeting. I'll share my screen and then hit the record button. The audio is turned on, so I'll talk them through what I'm doing while I'm sharing the screen, while I'm on a particular website. and it may only take 5 or 10 minutes to record it. I'll stop sharing the recording, save locally. I'll upload that to YouTube and then share a YouTube link with them. So it's great. And I've done it. Aaron mentioned I'm a community college instructor. I use it for my classes a lot too. If I'm doing, if I'm teaching a particular topic or a particular software feature, I'll use the screencast. And there's fairly expensive screencast software that you can buy out there, but again, you can use the free version of Zoom to do it. And it's a great way to create screencasts. Breakout rooms. Okay, we're going to do breakout rooms live. So hang on for that. Let's see, how many folks do we have on, Aaron? 30. Good. So we've got a good number. Okay, so breakout rooms. Let's see what I want to say about them. So breakout rooms are meetings only. The webinars don't have the ability to do breakout rooms. Great way to interact, and requires technical know-how. And I tell people practice first. And I'm going to probably fumble through this a bit too, because I've done breakouts rooms only a handful of times. The hard thing with breakout rooms is hard to test it out because you need a good number of people on. I mean, the first time I sort of tested it, we had a staff meeting, and I asked about a dozen people to join early to a staff meeting that we had so we could try out breakout rooms. The idea is, so what's going to happen here is we're going to do it on this next screen. I'm going to create a breakout room, and so what's going to happen? You can see the little window at the bottom. This is the window that I'm going to see, and I can choose the number of rooms I want, and it'll evenly distribute the number of people on the call into those various rooms. So we've got about 30 folks on. So I think I'm going to choose maybe 5-ish rooms or so. That'll put 5 or 6 people. Now you need to exercise to do the sort of use case for breakout rooms. One of the use cases is it's a great way to get interaction and conversation going among a group. And sometimes you'll ask feedback and you've got 100 people on. It's difficult to get those 100 people. It's just from an organizational standpoint, it's hard to organize people and let everyone talk. So one way to handle that is we'll do breakout rooms, maybe 5 people per room. You're going to talk amongst yourselves. You're going to choose one person to report back once we come back to the main room. And then that single person is the one that's going to sort of share the thoughts of the group. So that's what we're going to do now, but we need an exercise to do it. So this is a very contrived way. So don't kill me on this, but I couldn't come up with anything. But I tried to think of something that was pertinent to Zoom and nothing came to mind. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to create a breakout room. I'm going to create breakout rooms. We're going to put 4 or 5 people maybe per room. Each participant, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I've got my timer on my phone. I'm going to set. So I'm going to give us 5 minutes to do this. Each participant's going to share something interesting they're doing this weekend. I know everyone it's fall, so certainly you're going to get outside, maybe enjoy the fall weather, go on a hayride and make a jack-o'-lantern with your kid, something like that. So everybody in the group in your room is going to share something interesting they're doing this weekend. And then you're going to choose amongst yourself, amongst your group, you're going to choose one person who's going to report out. So at the end of the 5 minutes, you'll automatically come back into the main room. And then I'm going to ask the leader of each group, or the reporter for each group, to report a couple of interesting things maybe that people are doing. So I think I want to stop sharing my screen just so that doesn't get in the way. So let me close chat. All right, so I'm going to do breakout rooms here. So we've got 26 participants in 5 rooms. Yeah, that's 5 to 6 people per room. So I'm going to do an automatic setting here. So you'll just randomly be distributed to those rooms. So you can't see it on your end, but I've just hit create breakout rooms, and now I can see a list of 5 different rooms, and I can see people in each room. So I'm about to do the open all rooms. So you're going to go. So I'm going to set my timer to 5 minutes. Again, each person is going to chat real quick, share something interesting you're doing, decide amongst your group who's going to report back, and then in 5 minutes when we come back, you're going to report, that person will report out some of the interesting things. Okay. All right, here we go. And yeah, if you're still in the main room, just so you'll know, folks, I think you have to accept, you get a message on your end that says you need to join the room. And Alan and Sue, I'm still seeing you all. So go to your room. Leave my door open just Bruce McCoy. Bones falls asleep. Leave my door open. Ah, that always gets me there too. Wait another minute now. Okay, there you go. So we'll wait for folks to come back. I always forget that when you click close breakout rooms, it actually takes another minute before it forces people to come back in. So Alrighty, I think, there we go. Okay, good. Alrighty, so now we've done our exercise. And again, that's sort of a contrived exercise, but I hope you see the whole point. If you were on again, there's all kinds of things you could do, but if it was a learning event or a teaching event, you might have folks break out in different rooms, have a conversation, come back and maybe report on a particular subject or topic. So at this time, I will ask, just feel free to jump right in. Our folks who we chose as reporters to report a couple of interesting things people are doing this weekend, and you can choose whether or not to reveal who those people are or not.
Sure, Mark, I'll go first.
Okay.
In our group, we have one member is going to be going out to lunch this weekend and going to the theater with her mom. Another is taking her son to the Art Institute of Chicago, doing some cleaning and decorating. Hold on, I got full screened. And then we have another up at North Dakota State that they're pretty much under blizzard. Their football team's playing tomorrow, and she's attending some weddings. And one other in Minnesota, they're getting some snow today. She's working from home, and she has the 4-H achievement program tomorrow.
Okay, so someone else.
Hey, this is Wendy, and I had an awesome group of movers and shakers. And in our group, we had Lori, who is also going to that football game. Y'all can wave to each other. And she's in Virginia. And then we had Nicole from North Dakota, and who's going to be shoveling snow this weekend. So if anybody's in the area and needs some assistance, there you go. Again, I'm Wendy, just spending some time with family. And Dawn in Nebraska is going to be spending time with family as well and going to the Miranda Lambert concert. And Natalie in Nebraska is a very busy lady, 2 birthday parties, pumpkin patch. She's got 4 kiddos and a volleyball tournament. So my hat's off to you on that one.
Okay. Who else?
Hey, this is Sarah. And I didn't jot down names related to what folks are doing, but we have someone kayaking in Montana, which I think sounds cold. Some quilting, cleaning house, volleyball tournaments. We kind of liked the breakout room. Some people didn't have cameras, so we couldn't see folks, but we could hear everyone. We liked the countdown. I liked the countdown at the end. So we knew when to wrap up our conversation as well.
And did you all, real quick, did you all see the 30-second? I said 30 seconds left, I think. Yeah. And again, that's why you really have to test and get feedback, because I think I knew that, but I had forgotten. I don't do breakout rooms enough that even when I say close, then it starts this countdown. And that's really kind of a user flaw on Zoom's part. They should have a better way to do it, or to let you know, because I was thinking as soon as I hit close rooms, you'd come back in, but there was another minute. So, okay, I think we got a couple more groups.
Hey, Mark, this is Jeff from Kentucky.
Hey, Jeff.
We had one of our group, Todd from Minnesota. He has a conference at his church tomorrow. Laura, North Dakota, she's getting a lot of snow too, and not sure, perhaps the wedding she was planning on going to has been canceled, maybe, I think, and so might be working from home. Kelly, also from Kentucky, is working around the house, and I'm headed to a arts and crafts show and a football game tomorrow.
Awesome. Who else? Okay, I guess maybe that was all our rooms. So good. So I hope, and I think, yeah, based on the feedback I'm hearing from you all, that sounded like a good exercise. Yeah, I don't know if that was your first time doing breakout rooms or not, but it's really solid. And if some of you might have saw, I popped into a couple rooms. It's kind of fun as the host. I can join rooms and then leave rooms. So again, think about it from a standpoint, if you're leading a meeting and you're sort of handling the breakout rooms, again, you can, okay, we're going to break out into rooms, and hey, at the 5-minute mark, I'm going to go in each room and check in with you and see how you're coming along, and you can let me know if you have questions. And so, yeah, it's a really robust, and it's amazing that it works, because even again, I don't use it that much, but I kept thinking, like, man, I know, like, this thing's going to blow up and folks are going to drop off, but Zoom certainly has the technology down. But again, I would say with a feature like that, practice because it's yeah, there's enough bells and whistles and things that you don't quite know where all the stuff's at unless you've done it a few times. So,
and Mark, a couple questions here.
Yep.
Are breakout rooms available with the Zoom Pro account?
So yes, right. The Zoom Pro account. And I honestly, yeah, we'd have to Google that and see. My sense is that it's probably pro or free account, but definitely with the pro account, yeah, you don't need any special license or anything like that. It's a part of a normal user account. Teresa says that they are just for a pro account. So yeah.
And Jennifer makes a good point here, which I think it's worth hearing. There's a number of folks here that are calling in from their phones, and they were able to get to the breakout rooms. However, she's not able to see the countdown. I assume the countdown at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it takes care of that for you. And again, from my standpoint, all I see from the administrator standpoint is when you break folks out, it's going to randomly put them in rooms, and I'm assuming it handles a phone user, the same way it handles someone who's at their computer. Okay. All righty, good. Let's see. So I've got a slide on help and support within Zoom. So Google it. I've got here. You can go to support. So I've got support.zoom.us here, and they've got a great knowledge base. But usually, if I'm trying to figure out something in Zoom, and of course, Googling something is what I tell my computer students. That's an art and a science within itself. But if you sort of hit the right keywords, Zoom, Zoom registration meeting room, there's a good chance that the first hit you're going to get is how to turn on registration in a meeting room inside Zoom. Now, of course, it'll link back to the support.zoom.us page, but I usually Google it first. They do a pretty good job of indexing those kinds of things. You can also go to support.zoom.us, and of course they've got a search box and they've got various topics you can drill down into there. I had chat listed, but I actually went back to this. The reason I've got the strike through is one of the features I loved about Zoom was I could always get a real live Zoom person on chat like within a minute or two. So I would very often go to support.zoom.us, and if you're down in the lower right hand corner, I think it still says chat. When you click on that, it'll pop up, and if someone has more information here, certainly share it with me. But I went there last week. I had a question about something. I clicked on that, and when I clicked on the chat, chat with a live person, all I got was I had to enter my contact information, type my question in, and put my email for someone to respond back. So whereas it used to be rock solid, almost 24/7, I could chat with a live person, and they were really knowledgeable too. I mean, I think it was somebody in their San Jose or wherever they're at, California. It was in their location there, and it was usually a pretty, they from a technical standpoint, they knew their stuff, and I could find an answer fairly quickly. Zoom has grown a bunch the last year. They may have went public, did an IPO maybe this last year too. So usually when that happens, you start getting into cost cutting measures and things like that. So I wonder if they haven't cut back on chat some. But anyway, that's just something to maybe try. And then I've got, you can email me. My email is marklocklear@extension.org. We're here to serve the cooperative extension service. So certainly if you have any questions, you can let me know. I'll probably send you a link to a Zoom support article, but that's going to show you how to do it. But anyway, yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. That is all I have for the formal part of the presentation. I did see someone was talking about editing Zoom recordings. I did that for years. When we did ours, we had a sort of a standard. We had an intro and an outro video. We would put the front at the end. I did some editing. I would use Camtasia. I think Danielle mentioned she's used Camtasia. That's usually my go-to video editing tool. It's simple enough. I'm not real sophisticated in the video editing that I do. And Camtasia is simple enough that I don't. I think I tried Adobe Premiere once, and it just, I'm pretty impatient. If I can't figure it out in 15 minutes or so, I sort of move on. And I think I wasn't having much luck. So usually Camtasia is what I use. Any other questions, comments?
So as people might type out their last questions or chime in with their microphone here, I'm going to put one thing in chat, and this is a survey, just a really short 3-question survey about your experience here in this learning circle. And if you don't mind doing that for us, that helps us going forward and refining what we're able to offer all of you. So I'll put that here in chat.
I didn't share with folks what I'm doing this weekend. So I've got I'm going on a train ride tomorrow. I'm in Western North Carolina in the mountains, and they have the Great Smoky Mountain Parkway, or Great Smoky Mountain Trains, something or other is here. But they do various things throughout the year, but they have a Peanuts, Charlie Brown themed train ride that they do. So we're going, my wife and parents-in-law and daughter. I've got a 5-year-old daughter. We're going to go take the train ride. They do a Polar Express ride at Christmas time too. So I think we may be going to ride the Polar Express too.
Julie's got a great question here. Why do you use Google Docs for registration?
You'll have to ask Aaron that. In fact, I want you to ask Aaron. I want you to tell, because I said, why are we doing that? And we could do it in Zoom. So Aaron, I want you to explain why you did that.
A couple of reasons. So a number of these learning circles that we're doing also involve enrollment into a platform that I talked about earlier called Engage and Empower Online. So because that is something that is exclusive to eXtension members, it's helpful for us to collect that data over into Google Docs, because that platform itself works off of the G Suite. So that's one reason we do that, and we're able to keep all that information there. We certainly could for something like this that was just really just a meeting here. But actually, Mark, if it's just a meeting, I don't know if we can do registration like we would with a webinar.
No, we can. Yeah. So you can. Now again, you don't have the number of questions. You can't add custom questions. Basically, all you get is first name, last name, and email. But I mean, the other advantage is too, and I think, Aaron, we've done this before, is often, again, is depending on who owns the meeting, only the person who owns it or creates the meeting has access to the registration data. So Aaron does our marketing for these. So, and Aaron, we go back and forth a lot in Slack. If it's a meeting that I've created, he'll say, hey, how many people do we have registered? He has to ask me, because since I own the meeting, it's under my account. Whereas with a Google form, he has a little more control there. So.
And we're still experimenting. We're a learning organization, and we're finding the best way for us to do things. So we try all sorts of stuff just to see how it will work.
Mm-hmm. All righty. I think we have beat this horse dead. Let's see what Julie says. I recently realized that it's easy to use Zoom features, send out follow-ups separately to attendees, non-attendees after our webinars, different info for each group. Julie, would you mind sharing more?
Sure. We've been doing webinars for quite a while, and Wendy, who's on my team, on our team, that we work together on webinars, but I run the technology, which is pretty funny. But so at some point recently, I realized the feature about sending out emails. So I used to send it out via like MailChimp, and but my MailChimp account's full. And so now there's a feature that you can go in manually and say, send an email to all attendees or to all non-attendees. Mm-hmm. So for example, we had a webinar earlier today. So Monday, I'll probably send an email out to all attendees that says, thank you. And here's the link to the recording in case you missed it. And then my non-attendees will get an email that says, sorry I missed you, yada, yada, yada. And here's the link to the recording. And we want to see you, and remind them, this is a series we're doing, to remind them in 2 weeks what the next session is.
Yep. And it's really
easy.
Are you familiar with the automated? Do you have the automated reminder emails set up for your webinars too?
Yes, because I was reminded when we had one that had really bad attendance that I forgot to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
that's a really important thing to remember to do.
Yeah, I actually had that. I had that in mind to share, but I just didn't make it in. But one of the advantages for registration with webinars in Zoom is, yeah, you can set up automated reminders. So in the past when I've done these, and generally I think I'll do them for hours that we do now. Again, I don't do them as much, but I would send out automated reminders 24 hours prior and 1 hour prior to the start time is usually what I found worked best. But
yeah, it really helps attendance, because say the time that I forgot to do that, we had really poor attendance.
And that's like with the meeting, that's one of the downsides of, again, I didn't put it as a pro and a con for the meetings versus webinars, but if you're doing a meeting, even if you turn a registration on, you've got to go sort of pull that data yourself and manually send out a reminder email as opposed to letting Zoom do that for you. The other thing, Julie, you got a webinar template set up for the webinars you create?
We use UFs. UF has one, and
Okay.
and it's one of those things I've meant to do because we have a multi-state project, and I'd like to do it, but just haven't.
Yeah, what I did, when I was doing these webinars full-time, I had different clients who wanted the same settings each month, and rather than, you're going to always forget something that they want, a particular poll question, is I started creating templates for each one of those groups, and I had sort of a base level template that I would use, and that way you don't, the standard stuff that they do each month, a lot of their poll questions were always the same, those kinds of things. You've got a template set up, so that works well. Wendy says, where do you create templates? You'll have to dig around. I think when you click the webinar tab on the left side of the screen, I think they show up over on the right side. You know what? Why don't we log in and I will show you. I think I've already got my account open here. Yeah.
And Wendy, I'm pretty sure it is from the Zoom platform.
Yep, I'll share my screen and you'll be able to see it here. Share. So you go webinars and then webinar templates up top here. And so you can see I've got a bunch the other thing is too, the other way you can do this that's nice is if you've got a webinar that you've created, when you click on that webinar, you can save as template here. And so once you get it configured, okay, I've got this. And I think for past webinars, you can do this too. You can save that as a template. So again, it's nice. All these little hinkies and settings and bells and things. You can go in, and once you've got those set up, you save it as a webinar. So all those things are already in place. Okay. I think that is all.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you everybody for joining us and wonderful questions. I use Zoom every day. Being a remote organization, I was able to learn a lot of things from both Mark and from all of you. So thank you for that. Again, we do have other Learning Circle opportunities coming up. Please check them out and share with your colleagues. We'd love to see you again. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. See you. Bye-bye.